Welcome to Praise, Prayer and Preaching with the Reverend Dr. Keith Garner, Superintendent and CEO of Wesley Mission.
You join us here in the Wesley Theatre in the first of 4 Sundays when we're asking some important questions. There are many experiences that cross our pathway in life that force us, I think, to ask all kinds of questions that are essentially the big questions, the questions about meaning and enduring purpose. There's a degree of frustration, I sense it, I'm sure you do, at the heart of the world as people wonder, is there really some enduring purpose to all of this, the world that we live in? People ask the question at difficult times. But my first question, if we take that overarching question, is there more to who I am? Now, I think people ask it at different times. And it's amazing just how many marvelously exciting, happy moments can be followed by questions. I think of the wonder of a child coming into a home for the first time for a family. And then the experience that was summed up by the T-shirt that I saw being sold in the children's shop, which was for a little baby. It said, "I party at 2 a.m. And I understood that. And many people have the joy of what appears to be, then followed by hours and hours of sitting and wondering, will our child ever stop crying? Can we get through these moments? The young person who lives in a world where everything seems to be sorted out, but still the deep question is a real one. What is my identity? I can't seem to make and keep relationships. It doesn't seem to work. In working life, when somebody begins their working life and sets out on a pathway and they have it all mapped out in their mind, and then they wonder why promotion passes them by. And you know, it's not as long as we like to think it is between being young and being middle-aged. Comma, you fill in the rest. Life is very short with all kinds of questions. And then I think the premature death of a colleague, a friend, all these kind of questions are thrown at us all through our life. Is there more to whom I am than merely living? The merely getting up and going to bed, merely going to work, merely making relationships with people around me? Is there some deep, enduring purpose? It's at times like that we have to ask those questions. Is there more to life than this? It's a question about ultimate purpose. And we live too often in the now. But this is about something far bigger than that. An initial conclusion is that perhaps we haven't given sometimes as much consideration to the basic questions, so that when the complex questions come along, and in life they do and they will continue to come, we can't answer them because we haven't actually dealt with the basic stuff. Who would try to think of reading a novel without knowing the alphabet? Who would try to understand the technology of the world we live in today without knowing some basic numerology? But so many of us struggle to answer the big questions, and we've never really focused on the just who am I? And how does faith and life and work fit together somehow? So it's as Christians that we ask that question. Just to be clear, looking for an understanding of life doesn't mean simplistic and naive questions and answers. But I think it does mean for all of us being prepared to explore and seek an answer to the fundamental questions. I think we've all followed somebody with that bumper sticker on that says, "Don't follow me, I'm lost." And perhaps there are a lot of people who are lost, conning a lot of people into ways of life that are clearly not fulfilling. Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian novelist, described how he found it impossible to escape from the question of meaning and purpose in life. From his writings we read, what is life for? To die? No, I'm afraid. To wait for death till it comes, I fear that even more. Then I must live, but what must I live for? That's the question. And no matter how young and how old we are in life, we have to ask it. Now, when we ask it, we ask it within the seasons of our lives. And it may have different expression. What for? It's the most decisive question of all. The Christian contribution is undervalued by many people. I think it's time that we as Christians stood up and said we want our voice to be heard. Sometimes you feel like we're the only voice that isn't heard. But in our culture, in our society, what we are today has in many ways been shaped by the Christian faith that is either taken for granted or ignored today. Folks are looking, but frequently we're not connecting because we're not even dealing with the questions that people are asking. We must find a way of explaining. So we have this psalm, Psalm 8, one of the best known of the Psalms. Some people have said that it's a psalm about wandering worship. It begins and ends with a tremendous sense of God's presence, omnipresence, that sense of who God is overall. And in between are some of the great questions, the fundamental ones about life. It's been said the song might have been sung at the grape harvest, when people were glad when it was the end of the day, the end of a season. Their hands were gnarled. They had done everything that they could do. And so they were glad to sing, "Oh Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Let me put my hands down." And you can see how some of these psalms would have phenomenal importance to people who sang them for the first time. But then you have that thought, what are mere mortals that you're mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. This is the fundamental question about human experience and existence. Lots of things throw us back on ourselves. Whenever I conduct a suicide memorial service, we have a wall where people can bring pictures and words and poems. And increasing numbers of people, hundreds now each year at the Sydney Opera House, come and share with us, and you read the poems about brothers and mothers and fathers and friends. And I feel, gosh, there are so many questions here. I remember there was a wonderful black soul group from America in the 1970s that sang a song, "There are more questions than answers." And I think that's how it feels for many people. This psalm offers the suggestion that human purpose is somehow wrapped up in the purposes of God. That if we are to find any identity for ourselves, any deep, abiding sense of purpose, it will be because our lives are somehow in God. I think it's what the New Testament talks about when it talks about our lives are hidden with Christ in God. The thought that Paul expresses in his letters. God's care for human beings has been shown through the history of the world. He underpins, he holds the world in the hollow of his hands. Now, we have found it difficult sometimes to express that, but I think that's the truth. Our world has become so easy, and the more we seem to grasp it and believe that we are the controller and the dominator of our future, the more clear we have to be is we are not. Jacob Bronowski in the 1960s wrote about the identity of man. He declared man is part of nature in the same sense that a stone is, or a cactus, or a camel. Such a conclusion is futile. The great thing that I think the Christian faith says about the human community is that we are unique with the capacity for a relationship with God. We are unique in purpose, identity, and the difference we can make to the created order. The Bible teaches from beginning to end that human life was created by God. So let's not be surprised that if people ditch the idea of God, they might find themselves bereft of understanding the world. If you ditch the very purpose of creation, don't be surprised if you start to misunderstand what the world is all about. The two are vitally connected. And when I think of the care of God, you see, I don't think of the care of God in some kind of nice, pleasant kind of way. I think there is nothing stronger than declaring that God cares for this world. And if God cares for this world, one of the ways in which our humanness will be judged is by the way we care for the world. People arriving on our shores in boats cannot be considered merely a nuisance. We have to ask the question, where are they leaving? What are they leaving? And what do our hearts tell us about how we respond in such challenging situations? These, I think, and a million more questions all lead us to ask, is there more to life? The lack of a common ground to discuss morality will always occur if we jettison the very things that will explain our purpose. So when we say that the Christian faith has no part in our culture, this isn't just rejecting Sunday school anniversary. This isn't just rejecting the church down the road. This is rejecting the fundamental truth that made us who we are. So therefore, when we reject it, we deny ourselves of the opportunity of understanding what it is that God has to say to us about our creation and about our world and about our human purpose. Now, there is a problem to be addressed. Our world is fractured. Our world is destroyed. I remember John Macquarie from Oxford a long time ago talking about the principles of Christian theology. And he wrote a whole chapter on the theme of imbalance. And he talked about the fact that relationships are not in balance. Communities are not in balance. And I thought, he's really talking about Christian theology in the most profound way, really. I just wish he'd used some other words. Because this is a fractured world. And we see so many expressions of that. The human condition is what leads the psalmist to say, despite everything we have, why are you still concerned about this? That's what I find. Perhaps they've come from the harvest fields and they're singing, they're saying, perhaps after all the selfishness, the brokenness, and the sin of human life, why are you still concerned with us, God? And when you think of the past 150 years on this planet, torn apart by war, death on a scale that's unthinkable. Being lost is one of the images that we use to describe what's wrong. Human beings without a vital relationship with God are lost in the maze of life. We took our grandchildren on one occasion into a little maze. There's nothing more fun than a maze until you can't get out of it. In the best, whether they're at Hampton Court or whether they're at Richmond in Tasmania or in other places, in the best of them, there's often a man or a woman sat above so that they have all the answers. That if you can't get out, you can look for help. But in the maze of life, people have forgotten that there's anybody to look out for them. I think things have changed. Some old-fashioned Christians would say, if we could just go on the town hall square again, like we used to do from this great mission. And I stood outside Woolworths, and I shouted at everybody and told them they were all sinners, that would get them all back. I have to tell you, no, no, no. The world has changed. But I do know this, that the problem hasn't changed. I do know this, that no person who's ever dealt with human relationships will fail to understand that this world is broken. That no person in business or commercial life that is dealing with human beings every day trying to work out what it is to do business and deal with people will understand this. No person in education or government would fail to understand this. No person involved in the caring agencies or vocational life will fail to understand this. Understand what? Understand that this world has been marred by selfishness. And it does need to be put back together. Christian people are not exempt from arrogance. And we were big on arrogance at times. I think acknowledging that is a very important part for Christian communities who want to communicate in the world. These stern words came from what used to be known in the old days as letters to the editor. Letters to the editor was when people sat at home and they got annoyed about something, and one of the avenues open to them was to write to the daily paper letters to the editor and tell the daily paper just what you thought. And a good editor would pick out some of the best. And religious people were very good at it. These stern words were found in a letter to the editor. It makes me highly indignant to see so many heathens, agnostics, skeptics, and atheists taking a rest on a Christian holiday. It went on to conclude such people should be stopped from having time off at Easter unless they remember that this is a Christian festival. What an appealing invitation to church that was. You see, there's a problem that has to be addressed, but God has made provision for our care. The God who created the world and has sustained it by his love has recognized the brokenness of this world and has shown us a way in which human relationships can be restored. The word restoration has all kinds of nice feelings on it now. We have TV programs that talk us about restoring properties and houses. You get those 2 or 3 experts to come round. He does the garden, she does the painting, and the other one stands there, Steve Winter, and explains how easy it all is. And they restore something that's pretty dull into something that's amazing. Restoration. The patient skill of solvent and scalpel that restores a piece of artwork that was damaged or old or decrepit into something beautiful again. The quiet craftsmanship that can take a piece of furniture and can make a piece of furniture that is damaged live again. But you know, God has a restoration program for human beings, for communities, for society. This week I was part of a group that were launching a question for Australia. What kind of Oz do we want? And I think it's a community question. But I think it's an individual question as well. We need to be ready to acknowledge the truth of the Christian faith as we see it in Jesus Christ, the saving power of Christ displayed in the cross, and what that can say to our bruised and broken world. We need to be wary of political power that tips the hat at religion. And that happens left, right, up, down, wherever. Where religion becomes something that we can use rather than something that can bring salvation to our world. It's certainly true that the church has not always been a good example of God's transforming power. An unfortunate wayside pulpit in a church said, "Why let worry kill you off?" Then there was a gap and it said, "Let the church help." And you somehow felt that's not quite what they were trying to say. And the Christian church has produced its own brand of neurotics, where religion is as much an obsessive, compulsive part of behavior as any of the other dangerous, compulsive habits that people have. We've separated word and deed. The word that speaks of the saving power of Christ and work with the poor and the homeless and the hurt and the damaged and the marginalized. And we were given no permission to separate them. We were given no permission to do it. But we did it. And we do it. God's loving, caring, and saving power is what challenges our lives. And there are a number of things that we need to do to open our empty hands and hearts, to acknowledge that God loves you and cares for you. You notice I use the word you? Not just us, not just me, but God does love you. Believe that somehow God has done something about it in Jesus Christ. He's not sat on the sidelines. How many of us have been to the sports fixture and we've seen the match in full play, and sat by us here in the crowd is a man shouting the odds, and he shouts about the young fellow who's just nearly 6 foot tall, quite light, nimble, fast, but somehow it doesn't work for him. And the man next door knows how it should be done, and you look at him, and he's 19 stone. He looks as though he's never been out in a playing field for about 30 years, but he knows how it should be done. The one thing you can say about our gospel is that God did enter this world, not as the one criticizing all those that were getting it wrong. I mean, I look at the words of Jesus. Try to follow them in the gospel. You find that Jesus, and to quote scripture itself, God didn't come into the world to condemn the world. He didn't come in to criticize the winger who didn't get it. He didn't come into the world to be able to say, all these religions got it wrong, all these people are getting it wrong, everything's broken in our world. He came to show us the way. If only we could capture something of the positivity of that approach. Consider carefully what it will mean if tonight, in this theater or at home, we should decide that this Christian faith, look, we've been for years, we embrace it, but I'm going to make a new decision. If you did that, what would it mean? Consider carefully. But you've got to do something about it. I think doing things are so very, very important. It can happen in a moment. I have in my mind they were men, they could have been men and women, 3 men who became ministers and leaders in a Christian church, who all found Christ one afternoon in the open air, when they heard somebody tell the story of Jesus Christ. 3. And the impact and the reverberating power of such change was enormous, simply by acknowledging. So it can happen in a moment. Sometimes it doesn't happen in a moment. Bill and Gladys Smith received a letter in 1988, sent through the British postal system, and it was stamped March 1938. Where had that letter been for 50 years? Well, I suspect that whatever the letter said, if it had some things to do, those errands would have long passed. If there was news about family, that news probably had already been discovered. But does it matter really? It got there in the end. I remember being at school and having that fun moment in this question, just who are we, where we were asked to write down just who we were. And we started out with our name. The second line was the road of our address. Then it was our suburb. Then it was our country. Then it was our continent. And it went on and to the exciting moment when the date became part of the address. This fundamental question about who we really are is a deep question about life. We can sum up human experience in many ways. We can sum it up by the length of a person's life, but that's not adequate. Some lives are but a short story. We can sum up human experience in terms of public achievement. But we know that there are many apparently successful high achievers in this world whose lives are confused and self-destructive. We can sum up human experience in terms of happy families. But that opportunity is not given to everyone. Is there more to who I am? Well, of course there is. When the psalmist asks that question about human existence, he asks it for me. He offers it to you. And the answer is somehow bound up in the purposes and care of God. And on this first question, on this first evening, I invite you to consider what that might mean. Some of you have struggled with things in your own experience. Relationships have gone wrong. Work has gone wrong. Life hasn't turned out as you quite wanted it to. But you know, I love that our God is the God of the comma, not the full stop. Our God is the God who says whatever you have been through is not what matters. What matters is the now. And the trusting of our lives afresh and anew into the hands of Christ. We do like to solve things ourselves. You know, men are good at it. Men here, as opposed to women, men are skillful at being able to do it ourselves. There's nothing better than a man, a woman in a car when they are lost. And I will tell you now, in 90% of cases, the man will not acknowledge that they're lost. Don't worry. And when you pass that same shop for the third time, you say he's lost. But it's a big thing to acknowledge. And we do like to fix things and solve things ourselves. And that's why the Christian faith is so interesting, compelling, and demanding. For what God offers to us is not solution in the simplest sense, but offers us a way and a purpose. And I think I want to say, it's not a sign of weakness to reach out for help. The great thing is that as we reach out, we find that God is reaching out to us too.